Hello, so welcome everyone. My name is Amy. I work for Real Ideas organisation, a social enterprise in Plymouth, and we work with young people, organisations and communities to solve problems and create opportunities. Over the years, we've supported many community groups and businesses to take ownership of assets, provide business support and help develop community engagement activity. But we didn't start as consultants. No, we've learnt from our journey. As a trading organisation, we run a number of buildings in Plymouth, Ocean Studios, Devonport Guildhall, the Market Hall, our new building, and Sea Space in Newquay. So a lot of our consultation comes from the lessons we've learned and of course the mistakes we've made along the way. So as Real Ideas, we often work with people who've already acquired space, normally via community asset transfer with a local authority. But there are obviously other organisations like Nudge who acquire buildings themselves by raised capital. So today I have the pleasure of welcoming two of the community businesses that we're working with at the moment via Power to Change. They are Karen from the Village Hub and Debbie from the Zebra Collective. So they're just going to share their experiences now of taking on the spaces that they're working on at the moment and things that they've learned as well. So I'll let Karen start first.
Hi, so really nice to meet you. First of all, I feel a little bit of a fraud because we haven't bought our building. We haven't got as far as community asset transfer yet. Our journey was, we had started as a mutual aid group out of a community association, so really, really low key. And then there was an empty property in our local high street, which is a suburb of Plymouth, really, that had been empty for well over 5 years. We didn't even have the confidence to go straight in and say, can we have the building? So what happened was somebody else had let the building for a different use, but had found a better option up the road. So we'd kind of come in on the back of him, really, as a subtenant. The building was in an incredibly poor state of repair because it had been empty for so long. So we negotiated a rent-free period with the landlord. And that's kind of really continued now. So we moved in about August last year. With no experience, no building experience, no anything experience, no real property experience. And then we managed to get £10,000 grant from the lottery, and because we weren't paying any rent, probably about half of that went to starting to renovate this very tired old building, and then maybe the other half of that went to paying some people to be able to do that on a kind of full-term basis at a much reduced daily rate, if you like. Yeah, so we do it as part volunteers, and then we have 3 people who are partially paid. Journey so far, so old buildings are a nightmare. So ask for your community asset transfer for something beautiful, brand new, clean and shiny would be amazing. The biggest issue that we've had, we became a CBS in like just before Christmas. So part of our community benefit society ethos is that we are community led and run. So we had an interim group of founding directors, which are now disbanding to kind of go out to the community and to our members. We've realized that everybody has a different opinion about what kind of building they want and how they want to get there. So our community varies from people who are very eco-friendly, don't want to use anything that isn't reused or recycled, don't want to introduce new materials into the building at all, to the opposite extreme with people who are just addicted, it seems, to B&Q and Amazon. So we've got like a really wide variety of views and opinions on how the building should look and how it should be renovated. And that's really helping us, I guess, start to look at the way we make community decisions in a very real way. So we've kind of like jumped into this deep pit with both feet going, oh my God, this is like really interesting. But it is really helping us value each other, start to make community decisions, work things through. It takes longer, much longer that way, but we feel that that was part of our ethos that has to continue, including these difficult decisions about building. And in a sense, COVID has helped that because it slowed the process down. So right now I'm at home because there's a frantic team of people painting up in the pub at the minute, because we have an open day in a couple of days' time on Thursday. So we suddenly had a mad panic and thought, oh my God, nothing's finished, nothing's finished. So we're doing like a kind of, I suppose, a bit of a cosmetic job really, because some of the problems with our old building are way more financially than we could feel like would be beneficial to invest in at the minute, particularly because although we have a really, really good relationship with the landlord, there are 2 flats above it. We have some conversation there about buying that building off of him, but this is really early days. And at the minute, with our uncertain tenancy, we feel that it's a poor, we couldn't justify pouring that amount of public funds in there to do like a serious renovation, which is what it needs really. It needs its plasterboard all ripping off, the tanking behind the walls to come down, and then the issue behind those walls to be investigated, which is just a massive job in this building. And it's something actually we would be quite interested to look at as we go forwards. Our area of Plymouth has got a huge amount of shop fronts that have really been unloved forever. You know, they've had short-term lets, they've always been shop fronts, they're in old Victorian houses, they've never really been loved or looked after. So how do you renovate those properties in a sympathetic way, staying true to environmental principles, is like a huge ask. And we're hoping to work with the university in September to be able to just explore it, if it's even feasible or viable, because what happens is somebody comes in, does a very partial quick fix, slaps up a bit of plasterboard, ignores the back of the shop completely because people don't really see that, and it you know, you just get the ongoing effect of really poorly cared for, non-looked after buildings, and what that does to the community as a whole. So we have empty properties, we have really run-down properties, we have businesses that come and go on a shoestring, and we have the corresponding decline in sort of civic pride and feeling good about yourself in this area. So we're in Stoke to answer that question, Stoke Village in Plymouth. So it's a high street. It's got quite a lot of people in there who've owned or run businesses through generations. Quite a lot of people's like families had businesses there, and so they've kind of passed on. But they've seen the area go into steep decline, mainly because our local dockyard employed 30,000 people back in the early 80s. That's now gone down to about 3. And the Navy likewise has gone from about 50,000 to I think 30,000 right across the country. So therefore there's been a massive decline in the kind of people who would have used our local businesses. We used to have 17 pubs from the dockyard right up to where Stoke Village is. That's gone down to 9, so it's still a fairly substantial amount, and most of them are hanging on to by their fingertips, particularly because of COVID. So it's got a really uncertain future as well, which is why we're there. So is that about enough, Amy? Is that happy?
Yeah. Does anyone have any kind of questions or comments for sort of Karen at this point at all? No? Cool. I think what kind of Karen's saying kind of feeds into sort of, you know, a much broader kind of context in terms of, you know, looking at high streets and local high streets and what happens to them. You know, see, we all know they're in decline, we all know they're changing, we all know there's lots of sort of buildings available. And I know in Plymouth, particularly in the city centre, through the Heritage High Street Fund, we're kind of trying something different. The council are trying something different in terms of meanwhile use of space, and see how that kind of creates opportunity for sort of longer term use of spaces. So it'd be interesting to kind of see how that works over the next sort of year and how that can be translated elsewhere. Cool. So Debbie, thank you for joining us. Wondered if you could just sort of share a little bit about Zebra and what you're looking to do with community asset in Devonport.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everybody, Debbie Freeman. So I suppose the first thing to say is Zebra Collective is kind of the holding organisation for this piece of work at the moment. We are working on setting up a charitable community benefit society that will take the project forward. Just wanted to show everybody a picture of Welcome Hall. Can everyone see that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the frontage of Welcome Hall, and to the left is a lovely, what used to be all part of the same building is now the Devonport Playhouse, which is a community theatre. And as you can see, Welcome Hall is, the top of it's quite lovely, the street level stuff not so much. So that's the first job. So Welcome Hall is a building that's owned by Plymouth City Council, and actually I see Patrick is in this room as well, and he's one of the people that we link in with at the council, so that's potentially quite useful if people have got questions around that, because Patrick can answer questions from the council side of things. So the building has been was a community centre for quite a few years. Devonport is an area for people who aren't in Plymouth. I absolutely love Devonport. It's fantastic. It's by the water. It's great. It's got a great community spirit. But, you know, it has a certain reputation in Plymouth, and it's certainly high on all the indices of multiple deprivation. It's an area that people have us pull a certain face when you mention. So the community centre was being run by a charity which was kind of partly using the building. It's a huge building, it's over 4 floors. It's got a very, very large hall, like a kind of school hall size hall in it. So it was only being partially used, and the charity that was running it decided, due to the retirement of the person who was taking responsibility for most of it, they decided they couldn't carry on. And my colleague, who's not here today, Mark from Zebra Collective, was approached by them to ask, is there anything that Zebra might do? Because Zebra ran a lot of their training courses from there. So we started having, a few of us got together who live in Devonport, and started to think about what we could do. We spoke to quite a few people. I think what's really strong in Devonport is there's a lot of really active people, and there's a lot of people who are really, really well connected into the community. So we spoke to a few people, and we spoke to some of the people that used to use Welcome Hall, and there was a real enthusiasm for bringing it back into use. So we sketched out some kind of thoughts about what we might do, and it was a real sketch out, because obviously one of the things we're really, really committed to is asset-based community development. So we really didn't, although we all are in the area, so that was a good start, we didn't want to be making plans without having a good conversations with local people. But one of the first conversations we had with the council was obviously them wanting assurances that we could make it financially viable if they were to consider leasing the building to us. So we started thinking that what we needed to do is obviously guarantee some revenue from the building. So the top 2 floors looked really, really good for renting out as office space and potential accommodation. We also made contact with architects to see if anybody would do some pro bono work for us. and luckily there was an architect that had just moved into Plymouth, and they were looking to connect in the area. So they agreed to work with us for free, really on the basis that if the project comes to fruition, we'll be working with them and hopefully funding them to do the work around the changes to the building. So we've been doing a lot of work with the architect, and we had to submit an expression of interest to the council to say, what we would. It was a very brief document. Obviously, their community asset transfer policy, the first stage of it is this expression of interest. So we had to submit that, really sketching out what our ideas were, how we thought we could make it financially viable, what kind of support we'd got. Alongside that, we spoke to lots and lots of people about potential renting of office space. We had a lot of people who were interested, which was great. Obviously, you can never tell until you get to that point of saying, here we go, who actually definitely wants to move in. But we've got a lot of people on the list who are saying, yes, definitely, that's something we're very interested in. So we're now at the stage of, we're in this feasibility phase. There's 3 strands to the work that we're doing. And the other thing to say is we're at some point, we're going to need some paid capacity. We've got at the moment, all of it's been voluntary on top of day jobs, which has been quite a challenge, but I'll come on to the funding in a second, as long as I'm not talking too long. So we've got 3 strands of work, costing the work that we need to do to the building, because as you saw, really ideally what we want to do is make the building look nicer, turn the ground floor into a more welcoming space for people. We've got the strand around proving the financial feasibility, so the business planning, and then we've got all the community engagement work. So the building stuff, we're working with the architects. We've got a list of surveys that we need to get done to cost it all up. We're looking for funding for that at the moment. Financial feasibility, we've had some funding through Empowering Places that Amy mentioned to help us with the business plan, and also to fund some of our time to do that. And we're just setting off on a couple of months of really intensive community engagement. So being out and about, having conversations with people, and not only obviously about what they want to see in the building, but what they can bring and what they want to offer in the building. And the other thing, as I mentioned, we're working on the setting up the vehicle to take this piece of work forward. There's so much to say. I'm just like, just so much work going on. I think that is it in terms of, maybe people might have questions. And as I say, what's great is Patrick's here as well. So if there's any questions about the council side of things.
Cool, thank you, Debbie.
Conscious of the time and that I've already spoken for quite a long time, so
that's all right. That's all right. Rachel's got a question. How many volunteers are currently working on this?
On our project, only really the core group is 3 of us. And then we've just recently set up a kind of a planning group, which is local people that are wanting to be involved in the development of ideas around it. So we've got that as a backup. Obviously, we're not asking those people to put in huge amounts of time. So the core group is 3 people, which sounds really silly when I say it. No wonder we haven't gone as fast as we'd. No, yeah.
I think that's a valid point though, because that's like the realities of it, isn't it? It is a monstrous task to take on an asset, to take on a building. It's a huge, huge thing. And there's all these kind of moving elements that are going on at the same time. And from sort of Real Ideas perspective, the key things that we sort of see, these things that are moving, and like, the design and the build. So, what's it going to look like, the structure, the aesthetic, what is it going to be used for? The income generation. So what's the business idea? What's the business case? what's your traded incomes, routes into marketing, and who are your customers, and identifying those people, and doing some sort of community analysis, you know, what's already there and how do you kind of fit in with the kind of ecosystem that's already there. Then you've got this thing around ownership. So what's the status? So what is its current status? Is it freehold, long lease, short lease? You know, do you need licenses around that? And then obviously you've got, you know, partnerships. So who can you connect with? Are there other stakeholders you can sort of link in with? Are there any anchor tenants that you can connect with and maybe sort of take the burden, share the responsibility? There's the social impact. So what kind of impact are you looking to create via this building, and who are, you know, the people that you're kind of working with? Who are the people in the community that are going to use the space potentially, and how does that fit in with a kind of business model? And then there's just the governance of the actual organization. So who, you know, what's the organization that are holding this kind of this space, this building? You know, what does it look like? What's the best legal structure? Who's going to be involved in terms of directors? Are you going to have members? Is it going to be community owned? And who's going to staff it as well, and how that all is kind of paid for? And then that goes obviously onto funding and finance, you know, where to kind of get the funding, who to kind of partner with. Could you get social investment, you know, all those kind of things. So it's a lot to think about.
I think it is, but I think for me, what the three of us that are the core the core members are all people who've worked all our working lives in kind of helping services, in mental health, in adult social care, that kind of stuff, and community work. So we've got lots of experience of that side of things. What we didn't have experience of is the development of the building side. Some of us have run buildings, but not the development. But I think the message from us would be it's getting everything in order in your mind. I think the thing that was tricky was when we set off, you can see there are so many different strands, all those strands you've just described, and they all need attending to. And it's, okay, what order does everything need to happen in, and what's priority? And that's been ever shifting for us. So the kind of project planning around it has been a challenge. Not in terms of what needs doing, but the constant shifting of priorities has been quite a challenge. But I think, you know, the message is none of us had the experience of the building side, and it's not, you know, it's not impossible. It's complex, but every step in itself is quite, you know, relatively simple. It's just the complexity of the overall and getting it all in some kind of good order and having a good project plan for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And what I was saying there wasn't intended to sort of scare anyone. It was just like, it's a massive thing. But you're right, it is ever changing, and it is a bit like a Rubik's Cube in a way, where you've just got to sort of juggle all these things, but it's totally worth doing. And if you've got the right sort of, you've got your people around you, who are all kind of really invested in it, you can totally make it happen. And I think, you know, looking at you, Karen, that's like a great example of that, in a way where you've kind of just gone, okay, let's just do this thing, and actually it's kind of working, isn't it?
I think for us that's really helping us, because I think if we so for us, the building came out of COVID. Really, we felt it was really important to have a physical premises and a physical place for people to be able to connect to us, as well as doing telephone calls and all that kind of thing. So it came out of a desire to meet our community in a better way. And because we've run as a community larder and we have organic boxes of veg that we distribute, we've been able, as a food premises, to be able to stay open throughout COVID. And that's our number one aim. So for sure, we had our food and hygiene and health and safety in to get our food in order, and our building is safe, but it was definitely and is definitely not pretty. And so that's kind of the process that we're now beginning to get into, and that, I think, is possibly if you were doing it the other way round, it would be more sensible. You would kind of do your kind of hardcore renovations before you moved in. So, you know, that would be the sensible way to do things. And you'd probably have some kind of plan, like feasibility plan, architect's drawings, something like that to start you off. So we kind of went about it in completely the wrong way. But the reason for doing that was because of the community, and that's the kind of thing that pulls us through, really. Because otherwise we might just go, oh, this is far too much hard work. But what we've discovered by having a presence on the high street for people just to be able to open the door on their daily work and pop their head in and maybe pick up a tin of beans, that community connection has been the best ever. And that's the kind of thing that kind of holds us together and keeps us going and helps us get up in the morning and go, you know what, this is really worth it. So I think it's difficult, you know. I think in hindsight it would have been better to have done some of the building work first and got some of those really big jobs done first, but we might not have had the energy and the effort to have carried on if we hadn't had the kind of community interaction and the people that we connect with and the volunteers to be able to make all that happen. If we hadn't had those people connections, we might not have had the energy to carry on. Yeah, because I think that is the nature of old buildings. They are a mare. They are a bloody mare. So that's hard for all of us.
I was just going to come in on the before, sorry, then we must ask if there's any questions. Apologies. I was just going to come in on the old building thing. You know, Welcome Hall is not old enough, because what we're finding is, for funding, it's actually easier to, or there are opportunities that we are unable to take advantage of because the building's not old enough. So Architectural Heritage Fund, Heritage Lottery, they, you know, obviously they're not interested because the building it's not historic enough and it doesn't have enough historic significance. So it's quite interesting, the old building debate, because we're wishing Welcome Hall was older so that we could take advantage of some of that funding. Sorry, Amy, did you want to open it up?
Right, yeah, I was kind of interested to know, yeah, why, what's brought you all here, I guess, in a way. Why have you joined this group? So I don't know if anyone wanted to would be happy to sort of share who they are and what they're doing at the moment, I suppose, in terms of buildings. Go for it, Beth.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth. I work for a socially engaged arts organisation here in Plymouth called Take Apart. I'm currently working with communities in Coxside, and they used to have a kind of porter cabin in their park as a small community use space, and that has been taken away through park redevelopment, which is great because the park looks fantastic now, but now they're without that asset. There aren't very many empty spaces in Coxside that aren't either huge industrial spaces and just feels like a bit scary and too much to take on, or are owned by the marina. So yeah, I'm just kind of interested to hear, it's really interesting to hear the Village Hub, how, you know, you haven't gone down the community asset transfer route. And I'm just kind of thinking if anyone has any top tips for negotiating, borrowing and stealing from landlords, and showing about that kind of corporate social responsibility and that impact and that community engagement that landlord, particularly if they're a big presence in a community like the marina in Coxside, is. So yeah, those are some of the ideas that have brought me here, and thanks very much for sharing all your stories.
I would say just go and talk to people. So I think we didn't realize this building was empty. It was a real eyesore in the street for over 5 years, and we just moaned about it the same as everybody else. kind of presumed it was owned by some out-of-town landlord or a big corporation, you know, so we just were quite passive. But actually it's owned by somebody who had a shop in Stoke for like 30 years. His family owned shops there. He now lives in Bristol. He's quite elderly, but for him, he has the rental from the top two flats. For him to be able to just say, look, here's the key, do some work to it, was actually a very laid back and easy conversation. And he's been to visit us once, but it's a really kind of hands off. He's not really bothered really in that sense, apart from us starting to push the conversation forwards now about actual ownership, because he's really pleased to see something in his area really. Yeah, so I would say just, you know, be bold, grab the conversations, and I wish in some ways we'd done that conversation sooner, but we just got hit by the same sort of like pessimism as, you know, I wonder who owns this building, there must be a reason why it's still empty, we can't possibly do anything about it, we don't know what to do. Yeah, so I just think, you know, go and make inquiries and ask questions. And I think in some ways private landlords are even easier to deal with than what is going on with like council and asset transfer, because they can afford to be generous. They can just decide to say, oh well, you know, trial it and see what happens. I mean, and at the very worst it doesn't work out, but you know, at least in that period something has been reasonably positive really. Yeah,
yeah, I would agree. Like, yeah, go and speak to people, go and find out who, you know, who's best to talk to, and just make some noise and ask. I think go in with a bit of a plan as well, kind of like have, you know, obviously I know with Take Apart you've got really amazing links in with the community, really great connections, so kind of, yeah, starting that kind of work, like what is it actually the community is asking for, what is it they need, and kind of having a bit of a game plan, you know, in some ways just to pull on the heartstrings. Do you know what I mean? Like just making your case, I suppose, and going armed with that information, and actually what a huge amount of impact and, like you say, corporate social responsibility that could have for, say, someone like the marina, and just sort of sell the idea a bit. But definitely I would just go in and sort of, yeah, ask the questions, and because you never know until you try. And you know if you know there's organizations around, if you know need support with that or anything like that, obviously Real Ideas, we can kind of help with things like that. But also if you look at it, if it's looking at things in parks, you know, there's programs like the Green Minds and things like that are happening with the council, so it's always worth sort of asking, sort of, you know, if you're looking at putting something in the park, I suppose, to sort of talk to. Yeah, cool. Did anyone else want to kind of share who they are, why they're here?
I think, so as Patrick Boson, the council, I think the community asset transfer and use policy, we revised that coming up to a year ago, and obviously what it's trying to do is to encourage community use of council assets, and takes people through a journey. So as Debbie said, the first stage is submitting an expression of interest, and then obviously the property has to be put out to market first. But if there's no, you know, if there's no demand, then it can be offered to the community organisation. I think with community asset transfers, we're trying to concentrate on a variety of areas, because the council has numerous services with different responsibilities. So you have services responsible for arts and heritage, services responsible for green spaces, and if you look at those sort of areas, you'll find a lot of vacant or underused assets. And I think what I'm trying to do is to try and sort of form partnerships internally with council services to sort of see how we can group some of those assets together and see what community organisations are potentially interested in them. I think moving on to sort of the issue of the older buildings, I don't see that older buildings need be necessarily a negative constraint, because generally they're built very well. You know, a classic example is Ocean Studios, and the conversion of Ocean Studios, that was by no means a gold standard. There was £4 million to develop 2,000 square meters of space and 33 art studios. And I think what it boils down to is the actual need. You know, what do those artists need? Actually, they just need a space. They don't need necessarily heated space. And I think that's really a fundamental thing, is understanding what the needs of your prospective sort of tenants is going to be. And I think in terms of sort of like once you've had your expression of interest accepted, is to really sort of try and work out what you require from your feasibility study phase, and then that will sort of like develop into a project brief, which has to be continually renewed. And what we've done, working in partnership with Zebra and Welcome Hall, is we've tried to put together a Gantt chart, so that you have these, what Debbie sort of explain, the various strands, you know, the whole area, the actual physical building work, the financial feasibility, the business planning, and the community engagement. So if you set those all out in the Gantt chart, you can see at a given point in time, you know, where the pressures are, and indeed the governance, you know, in terms of the separate, you know, what key decisions need to be made, because it's a big deal, you know, sort of saying, right, okay, you know, we need to instruct our architects to undertake X, Y, and Z. So we're trying to work as best we can in the spirit of partnership, you know, without you know, doing the work ourselves. We can't sort of do that, but it's just sort of giving a real helping hand along that way. And I think you know, saying that you got, I think the most important thing, which was touched on, is the financial feasibility, because at the end of the day, you know, that building costs the council money, and the whole idea is that community organisations are given the opportunity of taking that responsibility for that building and generating income. So I think it's, you know, rather than going for having the whole idea is fantastic, but it is, if you can sort of phase that development in such a way that you can actually generate income in the earliest stages, I think that's a real benefit. And the one thing which really struck me in the Union Street video, I went round the plot before it was even done. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be, you know, this is going to take ages. And it's really remarkable how quickly they turned it around by, you know, having a sort of very, very light touch to it. So again, because if you go for absolutely everything, you know, then it can be a very costly exercise. So what is the minimum you require in order to get the project actually start running, and then maybe future-proof the project, like the whole, you know, the residential idea for Welcome Hall, that might be future-proofing of a top floor, which you can segregate. You don't necessarily maybe need to do it straight away. You don't want to get stuck into sort of planning permissions. If you can leave that out until a further stage, that might be a sort of benefit. So it's thinking about, you know, as just summarising, you know, it's getting those thought processes, a lot of thinking to do about how that building is going to evolve, because sometimes at the beginning, when you have an idea for a building, it doesn't actually necessarily turn out as you expected. And the classic example, I worked with the Four Greens Community Trust, where a building was actually sort of, an asset was actually offered to the trust, a former residential home. And then at the beginning, oh yeah, we'll have like a business centre and some startup units. And it's ended up as a targeted health and wellbeing hub. You know, you would never have known that right at the beginning. So that's just an example of how, you know, the evolution of the project, and it can actually happen in the detailed development stage. So that's why it's quite critical. You know, the feasibility study really needs to tease out all the options for the client organisation to make a selection of. Sorry, I've gone on.
Yeah, no, I kind of I agree. Like that kind of phasing approach to planning is for a building is absolutely essential, particularly if you can't get all, like you say, all the funds at one point. Kind of just taking on a section, making that work, and then kind of if you've got quite a big building as well, that's particularly a really useful kind of exercise to do. So Stella, I think you said you had a question off the back of another topic we were talking about.
Yeah, it was just from what Beth was saying. Basically, I'm on the board of trustees for a community arts organisation in Brighton called Quiet Down There, and we're working at the moment on like a pilot project to start a community laundrette in Brighton. And at the moment, we've sort of fitted out basically a small studio space in a market here, and it's not big enough to run the actual community laundrette from. We're doing like a sort of a consultation space, kind of doing people can come and do a free wash, and then they can kind of give us their ideas about what a community laundrette might look like. That's kind of it in brief. And the idea is to have an actual premises somewhere in the local area. We're on like a slightly out of Brighton High Street on the London Road, but as most people might be aware, sort of property prices in Brighton are absolutely astronomical, and every little bit of land is worth something, and nobody's really going to just give you anything. I mean, I've got a friend who just lives up the road in Worthing, and their council are actually kind of doing a similar thing, I think, to kind of Plymouth, kind of actually offering buildings that aren't being used to kind of people with creative ideas. But I don't think anything like that's happening in Brighton, because it's just all about the money always. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any tips or anything for if you live in an area like this, where arguably there could be a need for like a more, I mean, the London Road is sort of developing. It used to be kind of a traditional shopping street, and now it's very much kind of getting developed with kind of big blocks of flats, student accommodation, kind of chain cafes. We're getting a Starbucks, stuff like that, and but it still retains its market, although that was kind of done up in sort of the last 10 years. What we're trying to do is kind of, I suppose, give a space to kind of community and continuity, so sort of retaining the old community and sort of bringing in the new community, so it's not just kind of erased. But it's just a challenge, because where this used to be kind of a cheaper rent area, say 10 years ago, it's just all kind of going up and up and up, even though there are disused shops and things, but that's probably because nobody can afford to rent them. So I just wondered if anyone had any thoughts on that, and kind of how, I mean, I've got a few thoughts, like maybe just directly approaching landlords, and obviously partnerships and things like that, but I just wondered if anyone had any thoughts on that or that kind of thing.
Go for it, Karen.
So just to say, we went in as a pop-up. So when we got our first community funding from the lottery, it was as a pop-up. So that might be that you kind of put your foot in the door without a long-term commitment, which might please a landlord who might think he would get a better deal further down the line, but also means you would be able to access funding. And it just starts to break down the elephant one tiny bit at a time. And then I would definitely try and find any landlords, if there are any left in your area, that have some form of connection with the area. So I think that really helped us, because we weren't dealing with a purely kind of big corporate, huge property portfolio holder, and that made the conversation to find a person really helps.
I think that's a good point, Karen. Thank you. Stella, I don't know if you've heard of Kitty's Laundrette before.
Yeah, that's someone that I've been sort of like helping a little bit on the outside, but the actual kind of director of Quiet Down There, they've kind of had lots of consultation with Kitty's Laundrette. It was sort of like in part inspired by their work. So and it's just, yeah, it's amazing the different geography makes, I suppose, in terms of just being able to find somewhere and it be viable. And it's just proving quite tricky down here, I think, but we're in the early stages, so yeah. And
I think what Karen said is good. Trying to find a landlord that maybe has a connection with the communities is like a really good idea. And I guess, in terms of funds and stuff, I know I've worked with some community organisations who are so we've got a community group in Stonehouse who are looking to do their own eco housing and take over houses that were owed social housing, and because of the relationship with the housing association, they're obviously selling via auction. So they're like, okay, how do we get hold of one of these properties without any money via an auction? And there's kind of no room for communication or sort of wiggle room there at all. So what they're trying to do is their community benefit society. So they're looking to raise community shares, get the money in place, and then just kind of play the game and buy via an auction to get the first one under their belt, and then sort of go from there. So they kind of have to play the game a little bit, but they're doing it in a kind of really community orientated way. So sometimes, you've got to unfortunately play the game, but obviously that just depends obviously on how expensive, obviously, Brighton, really, really expensive market there, isn't it? So there are kind of different ways you can go about it. But yeah, I mean, if I kind of don't have any other advice to add other than that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, the I think the community share option might be a thought, actually, because I think there's a few enterprises like that in Brighton who have done that, because there are, there is, albeit a bit of a sort of contrast between all different populations. There is a kind of well-meaning affluent population in Brighton who you could possibly tap into to buy shares. So it's just kind of thinking about, I suppose, your individual context and your demographic and who can help fund it, and that kind of thing.
Because there's a student housing co-op, I think, in Brighton, Sea Salt. I don't know if you've come across them. They're really good. They're going through a community share offer, I think, at the moment.
Okay, I'll look them up. I'm not sure.
It might be worth getting in touch with them, because they'll be quite familiar with the process.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. We've got I think 5 minutes or so left. Does anyone want to kind of jump in and kind of, I think Rachel, you put your hand up at some point, and I don't know if you've kind of missed the point at which you wanted to come in, or did you want to kind of share? Anyone else?
Sorry, no, I think I was just putting a thumbs up to
cool.
Patrick's advocation for historic buildings, obviously coming, I was from historic England, secretly hiding here going, yes, I know all about funding opportunities with a listed property, but I also know the appeal of younger buildings, but I don't suppose it's anything that you'll want to consider anytime soon, or if it's appropriate, but there are things like getting a building listed that lots of organisations look to do in order to maybe enhance or help funding opportunities. And there's community local lists as well. So I don't know if that helps, but and maybe just to say that I'm the Senior Community Engagement Advisor for the High Street Heritage Action Zone scheme. So I know of Plymouth, but just listening to Karen talking about Stoke Village, there's plenty of schemes nationally that sound so much more similar to your high street setup than the Plymouth big project they're doing. So it might just be worth maybe looking out for case studies and stories and in the news, just so that, the Southwest region, there's a few, but nationally as well, just to link up and see how the people are. Oh, there is a conservation area. Cool. Well, that works for you. That's on your side. But so sorry, that I think I was just doing a thumbs up to advocate for historic buildings, reduce, reuse, recycle.
Okay. Cool. Sorry. Anyone else? Go for it. Yeah.
I'm Lanray. I'm based in Bristol. and myself and some other healthcare professionals, social worker and mental health, we've come together to start a social enterprise company to work with integrating the community in terms of health and also residential services as well, for those in need of housing. And we were just looking at how we can look at gaining like a community asset transfer. We're very new to it, and you know, how we can use our expertise from the as healthcare professionals to, you know, create social impact.
We're working, hello, wow, really good to hear that, because Welcome Hall is going to be, the focus of it is going to be kind of social purpose organisations. That's, as I said, that's our background. Interestingly though, hearing you say Bristol, we're working with the Cooperative Assistance Network in Bristol, who have been hugely helpful to us. So I don't know whether you're aware of them or
No.
yeah, that they're really helpful. So it might be worth getting in touch with them.
Lovely, thank you so much.
And equally well, if you want to link up, because you know obviously we're in a similar type of situation. So if you want to link, up, really happy to. I'll put my
that would be brilliant
in the chat.
That would be brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Debbie.
Amazing. Cool. Anyone else have any last thoughts or anything they want to share, or are we all kind of
Sorry, I'm just listening in quietly. Really interesting to hear what you all have to say. And I think it's amazing what you're all doing. I actually work with practical governance, doing brand strategy. So I'm slightly separate to everything that you're doing, but just really interesting. So thank you so much.
Cool. Oh, looks like we've got to leave now anyway, but thank you everyone. Thank you for your time. Cheers.